Hello everyone. I'm standing outside this beautiful building in the heart of Derry on this sunny day. I'm here to introduce our ISL Heritage Project video funded by DFC, the Department for Communities, so recognition to them for that. The project is about our ISL deaf community and their memories throughout the years of growing up, school, home, family and work. It comprises short videos from deaf people who live in the whole of Northern Ireland. My memories of school. I went to school in Dublin. My parents wanted me to be educated in Dublin, but the Education Board said no and advised them to send me to Jordanstown School in Belfast, as it would be better for me, and that the Dublin system of education was the oral system plus sign language, and that would impede my career prospects in the future. Plus, it was relevant for a deaf child from Northern Ireland to attend school within the UK. So, my parents looked into this and consulted with past pupils both from Belfast and Dublin, and upon deliberation decided they preferred Dublin School for me, but the Education Board refused. Fortunately, my uncle was a Sinn Féin MP, and he agreed to lend his support to overturn the board's decision. So, we were all called to a hearing at the headquarters of the Education Board in Bangor. There was myself, my mother, father, my uncle, all at the hearing. It was a very official event, and at the time I was only aged 8, but my education was already delayed as a result. Their application had already been turned down twice, despite my uncle writing to them to challenge their decision. So after much heated arguments and debate, eventually the board relented and permitted me to attend school in Dublin. It wasn't a momentous occasion for my family to achieve their wishes. I remember going to school in Dublin and seeing everybody using sign language for the first time. It was a hard life. I grew up in Belfast. I don't know what age I was when my parents found out I was deaf. I was sent to St Mary's School in Dublin when I was 3. I didn't get home at holiday times at first. Not Christmas, summer or Easter. But in the fullness of time, I was allowed to go home for the holidays. My education mostly consisted of religion. This religious education was taught by the minister and the teachers. There wasn't standard subjects taught like English. It didn't matter what the weather was, whether it was fine or raining. The routine was the same every day of the week until I left school. I was very homesick and I missed my friends. What school did you go to? I went to the old Cashel School. Where's that? About a mile away from my home at the time. What about yourself, Mary? What school did you go to? I went to St Anne's Primary School. Same as me, I went there. I remember it was oral and sign language wasn't allowed. Yes, it was oral for me too, and then I was moved to Cabra School in Dublin, St Mary's. Yes, I was too. It was for me as well. I attended a few partial hearing units. How did you learn sign language? In Derry, some of the boys could sign BSL basically, and they taught me. It was more like gestures, it was very different. But what about ISL? I learned ISL before that. I learned the alphabet. But where did you learn it? In Derry. Really? You learned ISL in Derry? I didn't learn ISL until I went to Dublin. I remember being able to use ISL secretly so the teacher couldn't catch me. I learned ISL at Dublin School. What age were you when you first went to Dublin School? Well, at age 5, I went to St Anne's, and that was oral education. And then deaf school when I was 10, and that's where I learned to use sign language. I was 10 too. I was 14 and a half. How did you feel when you first went to Dublin School? I froze. My parents took me to meet the nuns. Same for me. And we were all different ages. To communicate with my parents and understand what they were saying. They had no experience of deaf people. I remember explaining sign language to my mother, and from then on, we were able to communicate. My father, mother, aunt, and myself all caught the train to Dublin. That was my first time going to Dublin School. It was September 1948. I remember approaching the building. It was beautiful. I thought it was a museum. It was great. I remember following my parents in, and then they were gone. I was so upset and I cried. What age were you? I was 5 years old. I'm deaf, and I attended Beach Park School from age 3 to 8. It was good there, and the nuns took great care of us. The food was lovely, everything was good. But then when I was 10, I was moved to St Joseph's Secondary School in Dublin. It was run by the clergy and the Christian brothers. The experience was awful. The food was terrible, but we did learn different subjects like woodwork, metalwork, art, English, etc. Life as a boarder there was awful. I grew up in the country. I think I was 3 when my parents found out that I was deaf. I didn't realise I was deaf as my parents were able to communicate with me, despite not knowing anything about deafness. Then, when I was 5, I was taken to school in Dublin in 1954. We caught the train, and it was the first time in my life to even see a train. I was used to living in a small area. We departed from Victoria Bridge, and from there we travelled to Portadown, where we changed trains. That was where I was collected by a social worker who escorted me the rest of the way. I said goodbye to my parents. We had passed the Belfast on the way and changed trains. Then when we arrived in Dublin, it was so big. We got the bus then to school. I was taken aback by the journey and all the new things I could see. Then, when we arrived, I remember looking at the old school building. It was big and eerie, like a house of horror. I remember the Christian brother coming to meet me and telling me to bring my things and carry them up the stairs to the dormitory. I had to lug all my stuff up 3 flights of a spiral staircase. There was no lift. No lift? No lift. Just a spiral staircase. How many flights? 3. Oh yes, I remember that. Yes, 3. What about you? Yes, I remember. I was so upset leaving my parents and having to go to school in Dublin. I was very distressed, but I just had to get on with it. There were many other children there, most of them a lot taller than me, but they were all heights and all ages. It was a great time using sign language, and I remember learning to speak. It was 1967. Similarly, I remember the journey to school. I was about 5. My grandmother and my aunt took me by car from Belfast. I remember the journey and arriving at this great big building. I asked if it was a hospital, but they told me no, it was school. It did look beautiful, and the Christian brothers showed me around, and when I came back, my family were gone. I had a small case, and I remember seeing sign language for the first time. I was so upset and anxious because my parents were away. I was taken into a room and they told me everything would be okay. And then I saw there were other people signing to me, but I was frozen. I didn't know sign language before. The Christian brother told me it would be fine, but it really felt like I'd just been admitted to a hospital. Yes, it was the same for me. I felt so uncared for and repeatedly told to stop crying. I cried every day. I was born deaf, and I have a twin brother who could hear. Now, over the passage of time, I was sent to school at age 7. It was a mainstream school. However, it was decided that I needed to leave. So my father was looking for an appropriate school for me, and he found a deaf school, and it was Cabra School in Dublin. I was born in Newry, a deaf child. I was first sent to mainstream school, and that was in the countryside. I can still remember the narrow road up to the school. Then when I was 8, I got moved to a different building. It was a big building. I liked it. The other building hadn't been suitable for me. So I carried on there until I was 9.5. And then one day, the dentist came to do checkups at the school. So they were checking all the children, and when it was my turn, they realised that I couldn't hear, and that I was the only deaf child there. My parents didn't know this. So the dentist beckoned me to follow her and took me. And it turned out we arrived at my home. The dentist went in and broke the news to my mother that I was deaf. And she was so shocked and cried. I didn't know what all this meant, and I was trying to figure out why all the tears. So that was the end of my time at mainstream school. Following that, I was packed off and my granny and parents took me to Dublin to this large building, which was deaf school. A new Christian brother came to our school in 1955 and visited the dormitory. We were divided up into groups. There was 3 groups, and I was in the 3rd one. Do you mean the room you slept in? Yes. Yes, I was in the 3rd group. Obviously, it was a late age for me, but I was sensible enough, thank God. My family had left, and I saw other children using sign language, and I picked it up easily. I left school when I was 15 and a half because of the government in Belfast. I wasn't pleased, as I wanted to learn more at Dublin. The nuns signed to me. I wasn't in the oral group. They taught me the alphabet, and we copied things down from the board, and that was how we were educated. I was born deaf, but it wasn't realised until a late age. My parents had no idea, but it was noticed that I wasn't responding to sounds. So I was taken to the doctor, who confirmed that I was indeed deaf. It came as a result of rubella. From age 1.5 until I was 10, I was not exposed to sign language. I went to a mainstream school in Belfast, St Francis de Sales, on the Falls Road. Sign language was not used. It was the education method. It was oral. I did not know sign language at all. Also, I didn't know about British Sign Language or Irish Sign Language or anything. I never gave these things any attention. When I reached the age of 11, it was time to transfer to secondary school. The options were Jordanstown, England, or Dublin. So my parents picked Dublin. I can't remember why they chose there. We went to visit it, and it began from there. My parents drove me. I was very apprehensive. It was a big place. I can remember being very nervous at the sight of this big dark building. I was imagining Dracula living there. My parents took me in and made a hasty farewell, and I was left with the Christian brother who took me in. I was very upset and emotional. I think I had separation anxiety. I remember being taken up 3 flights of spiral stairs to the dormitory. It was so strange, as I'd only ever slept on my own or shared with my sister, and here I was with all these beds. I hadn't yet been introduced to any of the other pupils because they were in class, but when class finished, I met them and I was completely unaware of sign language. They were asking me all these questions like what was my name and where was I from, and I couldn't respond as I didn't know how to. When they gestured to me where I was from, I spelt the word Belfast, using my fingers to draw out the letters in the air. And then they immediately signed the word Belfast to me using ISL. I thought, oh, so that's the sign for that. It was the same with my name. I spelt it out the same way, but I hadn't yet been given a name in sign language. Then I saw some faces that I knew from school in Belfast, and I realised they could now use sign language. They said don't worry, that they would help me, and I got introduced to others from the north. They were from Derry, Fermanagh, Tyrone, all over. I couldn't sign at all, everything was new to me. But within about 4 weeks I learned to fingerspell, and then everything from there came naturally. What school did you go to? I went to Dublin School. What age did you start? I was about 4.5. I remember the other children, and I was very upset leaving home. I was taken there by ambulance. Ambulance? Yes. Time passed. I was about 8 to 10 when they told me I was lazy, not using my voice. Oh dear, that was awful, putting you down like that. Yes. And then they put me into a group that used sign language. It was very daunting, and I was mixed in with the older girls. I remember being so upset and crying all the time about it. But I had to get on with it. I'm sure you were terrified being in with an older group. I was. I cried and cried. I said I wanted to go back to the other group, but they told me that I couldn't, and they assured me that I would learn sign language, and I did. It took a little time, but I got there, and eventually I felt much happier. I started school in Dublin when I was 11. I remember you. You were about 5. My father knew your family well. You had lovely black hair and brown eyes, so adorable. Daddy said the signing group wouldn't be doing examinations, but you were learning to read and write. I was placed in the oral group, however, and you were in the signing group. I recall the emphasis on lip reading and mouth patterns. At home we talked fast, but then it occurred to me it was different in school because everybody was deaf. Do you remember Mass every day? Yes. I remember we had to say the rosary. Yes, the rosary, every day, Monday to Friday at 4. Up at 6:30 to make the beds, then Mass at 7, then back to finish making the beds. Mass every day except for Saturday. I remember you having a colour of school uniform. Yes, white blouse, green jumper, red checked skirt. Mine was a green jumper with a cream blouse. Do you remember the priest saying Mass with the nun lip speaking? I remember looking behind me and seeing your group and the nun smacking me in the face and telling me I wasn't allowed to look, but I couldn't resist watching sign language, which I found fascinating. What age did you start school? From 4 years of age. I attended a partial hearing unit in Omagh. Were you the same? I started school at 4. I went to Jordanstown in Belfast. It was deaf school. We used ISL there. Oh, well, from the age of 4 to 11 I attended a partial hearing unit, which was the oral education. I had some home sign language and the other pupils copied my signing. And the teacher, of course, used the oral system. We weren't allowed to sign, but we did secretly. Then when I was 11, I moved to St Mary's School in Dublin. Did you go there? Yes, but I attended Jordanstown, which was where I was very happy. It was a big school and I loved my class. The house mother was responsible for looking after us, as it was a boarding school, but she could be cruel. The care wasn't great there, and when I went home I was often sick and withdrawn. And my mother, who was a qualified nurse, realised it must have been to do with the school. Initially going to school I was very upset and cried my eyes out. I had to get the train. My parents couldn't afford a car or anything then. Oh, we had very different experiences. I was then moved to a different school. It was a PHU in Coleraine, which they used the oral system. The class had various ages, and I had to learn through lip reading. Imagine sign language first and then oral. I know. I wasn't settled at that school, and then when I was 12, I got moved to secondary school, and I was the only deaf person there. I couldn't communicate with them, and my confidence plummeted. I remember being shown around, and the teacher took me into my class and told the children that I was deaf and I would be joining their class. When she was leaving, she said bye-bye, and I said it too, and the whole class burst out laughing. They thought I'd said baby. It was the most horrendous experience. That shattered my confidence. I wanted to go back to sign language, as the oral system obviously wasn't working for me. So that was when I was moved to St Mary's in Dublin when I was 13. Initially to no avail, as I was put in the oral grip again. I was exhausted trying to communicate. It was such a struggle. Sign language was used in St Mary's, and I was moved in eventually to group 9. It was a hard time I can remember. I can imagine. I moved to St Mary's when I was 11. I was in the oral class for 2 years. It was hard work, to be honest. When I was at primary school, the class was mixed ages, but in secondary school we were separated into age groups, and it was realised that I was behind. My art teacher realised that my literacy was almost non-existent, and then 7 of us were moved to the deaf and dumb school. I was moved away from my friend group, which made me very upset. Also, I had to take care of some other children in the class who were disabled or had learning difficulties. However, my literacy skills did improve, thankfully, because of sign language. I did feel aggrieved having to be moved, but the teachers thought we would have an effect on the oral group by not being moved. I was in the same boat. Group 9 was the sign language group, and there was one person in my class the house mother made me look after. They were disabled, and always on the bus to and from home I was responsible to look after them because they had a bag on, which was a big responsibility from the age of 14 to 17. I was born deaf, and when I was 3, I started school in Jordanstown, Belfast. Back then, I didn't know anything about sign language. Initially, it was very difficult for me to settle in and get my bearings, but over the years, I got used to it, and I stayed there until I was 14. When I was 16 years of age, at the Deaf Club, that was my first exposure to Irish Sign Language. I had always only known BSL. I'd never seen ISL before, and now at the Deaf Club in Omagh, this other language was being used. I thought there was always only one sign language in Ireland. Nobody ever told me about this, and I was astonished when I found out there was another school in Dublin, and all along there were 2 signed languages in Ireland. I very quickly picked up ISL, which is a beautiful language, and I have to say I became more fluent in it than BSL. I can still use both languages, but because ISL is the more dominant language in the Omagh area, I use ISL more. Honestly, I thought there was only one sign language in all of Ireland, but all along there was 2. Now, Omagh, Enniskillen and Derry are mostly bilingual deaf areas. Both BSL and ISL are used, but in Belfast they use BSL, and in Dublin they use ISL, and then in between there are pockets of bilingualism. Oh, it's useful to know both languages. Did you do religion at school? No, I attended Jordanstown School in Belfast. There was no mass. I didn't know any prayers. There was a Protestant service. Then, when I was about 8 or 9, I had to prepare to make my first Holy Communion at home. and then eventually I got confirmed. I didn't know any prayers or anything, and when I moved to St Mary's School it was quite the opposite, because there was a lot of religion and I didn't understand anything they were saying. And when they were saying the rosary, it was very embarrassing because I didn't have a clue. It wasn't your fault. It was the system that let you down. What about you? Well, as I said, I went to a partial hearing unit and I got prepared for First Holy Communion there. I didn't really understand what was going on. I did have to endure Mass with my parents. I remember sitting there, not having a clue what was going on. Then, when I went to St Mary's School, because it was run by the nuns, it was very religiously orientated. There was a few times we had religion classes that was Tuesday, and then it changed to Bible every Thursday, and then there was Mass, and that continued until I left school. When you got up in the morning there were prayers, and then at 12 o'clock there was the Angelus. Yes, in the morning there were prayers in the big old building, but when we moved there wasn't. It was just like home. There weren't prayers, we just had breakfast. I thought there should have been, but there wasn't. I started school when I was 4. Oh, 4, okay. My mum and dad took me to Cabra. I hadn't a clue what was going on. When we arrived, someone said hello. I didn't really understand what they were saying, I just stood there. Was it the same for you? Were you the only deaf person in your family? Yes. Same here. I was born deaf, and I didn't use sign language at school. I was educated orally. Could you already talk? No, I didn't speak. I was 3, I think, when my parents realised that I wasn't responding to sound, and they decided to send me to deaf school in Dublin when I was 5. I stayed there until I was 17. We were separated into different groups. There was the deaf sign language group, the group with deaf speech, the partial hearing group, and those who were being educated orally. I did sign though with the signers, in secret. Were you the same? Yes. I could lip read a bit, but I was in group 1. I know my parents were worried about me, but when I got home in the summer they were pleased to see that I was starting to talk. Maybe they thought it would be better for you to be able to speak. I remember arriving at Cabra School and I saw sign language for the first time. I looked to my dad because I didn't know what was going on, but he thought it would be a great way for me to learn. Then a Christian brother called me over, and I was wondering where my daddy had gone, but he'd actually left. I can remember I gave a kick because I was so annoyed and upset that we didn't get saying goodbye. A bigger deaf pupil guided me in. I was so scared. There were all these children signing. It was so much to take in. And when I went to bed, I was so scared and I couldn't sleep. So I climbed up to look out the window. And I was looking, wondering what had just happened. The others were nice to me and told me it was okay and to try to get to sleep. Then I started to learn the alphabet and sign language. It was hard to try to get your dexterity because I wasn't used to it and I was stiff. But through practice and time, it came to me naturally, and it was great to know sign language.